The sky over Germany is burning. It's March 24, 1945. A formation of American B-17 bombers cuts through the smoke and flak. Their mission? Destroy the Daimler-Benz tank factory in Berlin. If they fail, the war drags on. More deaths, more destruction. But they won't make it, because 30 German Messerschmitt fighters are screaming toward them at 400 miles per hour. The bomber crews can hear it, the high-pitched whine of enemy engines closing in. Gunners grip their weapons, pilots tighten their straps. They know what's coming. Death. Then, something happens. Out of the sun, 6 red-tailed P-51 Mustangs died into the fight. The Germans don't see them until it's too late. Within 90 seconds, 3 Messerschmitts are spinning toward the earth in flames. The rest scatter. The bombers fly on, untouched. The German pilots radio back to base. Their voices are shaking. Sie sind wieder da. They're back again. The Red Tails. That's what the Germans called them. The Americans had another name, the Tuskegee Airmen. But here's what nobody told you in school. These weren't just good pilots. They were the most feared escort fighters in the entire European theater, according to German intelligence records captured after the war. And they were black. In an America that wouldn't let them drink from the same water fountain as white soldiers, these men flew 200 escort missions without losing a single bomber to enemy fighters. Not one. No other fighter group in World War II could say that. But you've probably never heard their full story, and there's a reason for that. Because what the Tuskegee Airmen did in the skies over Europe didn't just win battles. It shattered a lie the U.S. military had been telling itself for 150 years, that black men didn't have the intelligence, the courage, or the discipline to be fighter pilots. The Army believed it, the Navy believed it, most of white America believed it, and for decades, that lie kept an entire race out of the cockpit. Until 5 men proved them all wrong. 5 pilots who became so dangerous, so skilled, so unstoppable that the German Luftwaffe kept files on them. Not because they were curious, because they were terrified. This is their story, and I'm warning you right now, you're not ready for what comes next. Let's go back to 1940. World War II is raging in Europe. Hitler's forces are steamrolling across the continent, Britain is hanging on by a thread, and America is getting ready to join the fight. The military is ramping up recruitment. Tens of thousands of young men are lining up to serve. But if you were black, the door was slammed in your face. Not because you weren't qualified, not because you weren't brave, because of the color of your skin. The Army Air Corps, the branch that would become the Air Force, had a policy: no black pilots, period. Why? Because a 1925 Army War College study claimed that black men were mentally inferior and lacked courage under fire. It wasn't based on science, it wasn't based on evidence, it was racism dressed up as policy, and it was accepted as fact. Black men could serve in the military, sure, but only as cooks, janitors, and laborers. The jobs white soldiers didn't want. The jobs with no glory, no respect, no path to leadership. Want to fly a plane? Forget it. Want to be an officer? Not a chance. Want to prove you're just as capable as anyone else? The system was designed to make sure you never got the opportunity. But then, something shifted. A group of black activists, journalists, and lawyers started raising hell. They filed lawsuits, they wrote editorials, they lobbied Congress. They demanded that black men be given the same chance to serve and to fly as anyone else. One name kept coming up: Yancey Williams, a Howard University student who sued the Army Air Corps for rejecting his application solely based on race. The pressure mounted. And finally, in 1941, the Army caved. Sort of. They announced the creation of an experimental program, a segregated flight school in Tuskegee, Alabama, where black men would be trained as military pilots. But here's the thing, they didn't expect it to succeed. This wasn't about equality, this was about proving their point. The military brass wanted these men to fail. They wanted to prove once and for all that black pilots couldn't cut it. So they made the training impossibly hard. Tuskegee cadets had to meet higher standards than white pilots. They faced longer hours, stricter grading, harsher discipline. If you made one mistake, you were out, no second chances. And even if you graduated, you'd be sent to a segregated base where white officers openly hoped you'd crash. This wasn't opportunity. It was a setup. But the men who walked onto that airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1941 didn't care. They weren't there to make the Army feel better. They were there to make history. Let me introduce you to 5 men who would become legends, not just in America, in Germany. Number 5, Lee Archer, the Hunter. Lee Archer didn't talk much. He didn't need to, because when he climbed into the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang, he became something else entirely, a predator. Archer had one of the highest kill counts of any Tuskegee pilot, 4 confirmed, possibly 5. But numbers don't tell the full story. German pilots who survived encounters with Archer described him as unshakable. He didn't panic, he didn't flinch, he flew like a machine. One mission over Austria, Archer's squadron was jumped by 12 German Focke-Wulf fighters, outnumbered 2-1. Most pilots would have run. Archer turned into them. He shot down 2 in under a minute. The rest broke formation and fled. His wingman later said, "I've never seen anyone fly angry before, but that's what Lee did. He flew angry." After the war, Archer returned to the U.S. and applied to commercial airlines. Every single one rejected him because he was black. The man who had defended America's bombers over Nazi Germany couldn't get a job flying passengers over Iowa. Let that sink in. Number 4, Edward Toppens, the Top Flight. Edward Toppens was 22 years old when he shot down his first German fighter. He was 23 when he became one of the most wanted men in the Luftwaffe. Why? Because Toppens didn't just escort bombers, he hunted. On a mission over Hungary, Toppens broke formation and went low, chasing a MiG-109 through a canyon. His squadron leader screamed at him over the radio to pull up. Toppens ignored him. He chased that 109 for 6 miles, weaving through hills, skimming treetops, until finally, bam, he put a burst into its engine. The plane exploded into the side of a mountain. When Toppens returned to base, his commander chewed him out for 20 minutes, then pinned a medal on his chest. Toppens flew 68 combat missions, shot down 3 enemy aircraft, destroyed 4 more on the ground. But here's what broke him. When he came home, he couldn't rent an apartment in a white neighborhood. He couldn't eat in certain restaurants. He couldn't vote in certain states. The country he fought for still treated him like a second-class citizen. Number 3, Charles McGee, the Ghost. Charles McGee flew 136 combat missions in World War II, then 100 in Korea, then 173 in Vietnam, 409 total combat missions across 3 wars, and he never lost a bomber. Not once. No other fighter group in World War II could say that. German intelligence didn't just track McGee, they studied him, his flight patterns, his tactics, the way he positioned his fighter to maximize coverage. They called him Der Geist, the Ghost, because you never saw him coming. McGee had a philosophy: stay close, stay calm, stay alive. While other fighter pilots went chasing glory and dogfights, McGee stayed glued to the bombers. He treated every B-17 crew like they were his family, and they loved him for it. Bomber commanders specifically requested the Red Tails. They felt safer with McGee's squadron overhead than with any white fighter group. One bomber commander wrote in his diary, "I don't care what color they are. I just want to see those red tails when the flak starts flying." McGee retired as a colonel in 1973. He lived to be 102 years old. In 2020, at age 100, he attended the Super Bowl as an honorary captain. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, because America finally understood what he'd done. Number 2. Roscoe Brown, the Jet Killer. March 24, 1945. Roscoe Brown is escorting bombers over Berlin when his squadron gets a radio call. "Bandits inbound, high and fast." Brown looks up and sees something he's never seen before. A Messerschmitt Me-262. The world's first operational jet fighter, faster than anything in the sky, armed with 4 30mm cannons, capable of ripping a B-17 in half with a single pass. The Allied pilots call it the Jet Devil. And now, 3 of them are diving toward the bombers. Brown doesn't hesitate. He pushes his throttle forward and climbs. His P-51 Mustang is fast, but not that fast. The Me-262 can hit 540 miles per hour. Brown's plane maxes out at 440. But Brown isn't trying to catch it in a straight line. He's thinking ahead. He watches the jet's flight path, calculates its turn radius, anticipates where it'll be in 5 seconds, and then he fires. A 3-second burst hits the jet's left engine. The Me-262 shudders, rolls, and falls out of the sky. Roscoe Brown just became the first Tuskegee Airman to shoot down a German jet. But here's the part they don't teach you. When Brown landed, a white officer approached him, not to congratulate him, to tell him he'd have to use the colored bathroom. Even after downing a jet over Berlin, Roscoe Brown couldn't use the same facilities as white soldiers. That's America in 1945. Number 1. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the leader. If the Tuskegee Airmen were a sword, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was the hand that wielded it. He didn't just fight the Germans, he fought the U.S. Army itself. Davis was the first black graduate of West Point in the 20th century, and they tried to break him. For 4 years, his classmates refused to speak to him. They wouldn't sit with him at meals. They wouldn't room with him. They pretended he didn't exist. It was called silencing, a psychological torture technique designed to make cadets quit. Davis didn't quit. He graduated 35th in his class. And then the Army tried to keep him out of flight school. He fought them and won. By 1943, Davis was the commander of the 99th Fighter Squadron, the first all-black fighter unit in U.S. history. And the pressure was immense, because if his men failed, it would prove that black pilots couldn't compete. The entire future of integration in the military rested on their shoulders. So Davis pushed them hard. He demanded perfection, discipline, excellence, and they delivered. Under Davis's leadership, the Tuskegee Airmen flew over 15,000 sorties, shot down 112 enemy aircraft, destroyed 150 planes on the ground, and completed 200 bomber escort missions without a single loss. No other fighter group, white or black, could match that record. The German Luftwaffe kept a file on Davis. They called him Der Schwarze Teufel, the Black Devil, because every time his squadron showed up, German pilots died. Let me take you to the single most important mission in Tuskegee Airmen history. March 24, 1945, the March to Berlin. 1,600 bombers, 16,000 American airmen, the largest bombing raid in European history. The target? Crippled Germany's war machine once and for all. But German high command knows it's coming. They scramble every available fighter. Over 200 Luftwaffe planes rise to meet the bombers. The sky becomes a storm of metal and fire. Flak bursts turn the air black. Tracers streak in every direction, planes are exploding left and right, and in the middle of it all, the red tails. Davis's voice crackles over the radio. Stay tight, protect the bombers, no matter what. The German fighters come in waves, Me-109s, Focke-Wulfs, and 3 Me-262 jets. The Tuskegee pilots don't flinch. Lee Archer locks onto a Focke-Wulf and blows it out of the sky. Edward Toppins chases an Me-109 through a cloud bank and guns it down. Charles McGee stays glued to the bombers, picking off any German fighter that gets close. And Roscoe Brown, he takes on the jets. One of the Me-262s makes a pass at the bombers. Brown dives after it. He's slower, outgunned, outnumbered, but he doesn't care. He lines up the shot, fires. The jet's engine erupts in flames. It falls. The German formation breaks, and the bombers, every single one of them, reach their target and drop their payload. The Daimler-Benz factory is destroyed. Not a single bomber was lost to enemy fighters. Not one. When the Red Tails land back at base, the bomber crews are waiting for them. They cheer, they shake hands. Some of them are crying. One pilot, a white kid from Kansas, walks up to Lee Archer and says, "You guys saved my life. I don't care what anyone says. You're the best damn pilots I've ever seen." That moment should have been on the front page of every newspaper in America, but it wasn't, because most Americans didn't even know the Tuskegee Airmen existed. Here's the part they erased from the textbooks. After the war, the military conducted a study on fighter effectiveness. They analyzed kill rates, mission success, bomber losses, everything, and the Tuskegee Airmen came on top. Not just among black units, among all fighter groups. They had the lowest bomber loss rate, the highest mission success rate, and one of the highest enemy kill counts per pilot. The data was clear. The Tuskegee Airmen were the best. But that report was buried. It was classified. It wasn't declassified until 1995, 50 years later. Why? Because if the American public knew that black pilots outperformed white pilots, it would destroy the entire justification for segregation. It would prove that the science used to keep black men out of the cockpit was a lie. It would prove that racism, not ability, was the problem. And in 1945, America wasn't ready to admit that. So what happened to these men when they came home? They were heroes in Europe. But in America, they were still just black men. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. returned to the U.S. and was denied service at a restaurant on his own military base. Charles McGee couldn't get a job as a commercial pilot because airlines had a whites-only policy. Lee Archer was rejected from every flying job he applied for, despite having one of the highest kill counts in the Air Corps. Roscoe Brown earned a Ph.D. and became a college president, but was still refused a mortgage in certain neighborhoods. These men dodged bullets over Berlin, but in America, they couldn't escape Jim Crow. And here's the worst part. For decades, their story was deliberately suppressed. Hollywood made hundreds of World War II movies. None of them featured the Tuskegee Airmen. History textbooks covered D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, Iwo Jima, but never mentioned the Red Tails. It wasn't an accident, it was a choice. Because if America celebrated these men, it would have to confront an uncomfortable truth, that black excellence existed even when the system tried to crush it. That racism wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically stupid. That the military had wasted decades of talent and potential because of a lie. But the Germans, they never forgot. After the war, Luftwaffe records were captured and studied, and buried in those files were dozens of reports about the Red Tails. German pilots described them as disciplined, fearless, and impossible to shake. One report called them the most dangerous escort fighters in the American Air Corps. Another said, engaging the red-tailed Mustangs is not recommended unless absolutely necessary. Think about that. The Nazis, who believed in racial superiority, feared black American pilots more than anyone else in the sky. So why does this story matter today? Because the Tuskegee Airmen didn't just fight for America, they fought for the idea of America. The idea that talent, courage, and excellence have no color. The idea that if you give people a fair shot, they'll prove what they're capable of. The idea that the system is the problem, not the people it oppresses. In 1948, 3 years after the war ended, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981. It desegregated the U.S. military. Why? Because of the Tuskegee Airmen. Their record was so undeniable, so impossible to ignore, that even the most racist generals couldn't justify segregation anymore. The Army had tried to prove black men couldn't fly. Instead, the Tuskegee Airmen proved that racism was a lie. Fast forward to today. There are over 20,000 black pilots in the U.S. military, black astronauts, black aerospace engineers, black airline captains. None of that happens without the Tuskegee Airmen. They kicked the door open, and they did it while bombs were falling and bullets were flying, and their own country was telling them they weren't good enough. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Over 300 of them gathered in the Capitol Rotunda. By then, most were in their 80s and 90s, some in wheelchairs, some barely able to stand. But when the medal was presented, they stood at attention. Because that's who they were. Soldiers, pilots, heroes. And they had waited 62 years for their country to say thank you. Here's what I need you to understand. The Tuskegee Airmen weren't just fighting the Germans, they were fighting for every black kid who was told they weren't smart enough, for every black man who was denied a job because of the color of his skin, for every black family that was told to sit in the back, drink from a different fountain, go to a different school. They flew 15,000 missions. They shot down 112 enemy planes. They escorted 200 bomber missions without a single loss, and they did it while facing hatred at home. But here's the thing that breaks my heart. Most of them never got to see the full impact of what they did. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. lived to see a black president take office, but Lee Archer died in 2010, still fighting for recognition. Roscoe Brown passed in 2016, still telling the story to anyone who would listen. Edward Toppins never got the Hollywood movie, never got the ticker tape parade. Charles McGee, who flew 409 combat missions, didn't get national recognition until he was 100 years old. 100! These men earned their place in history, but history tried to erase them. And if we're being honest, it almost worked. Because how many people know their names? How many schools teach their story? How many kids grow up learning that the most feared fighter pilots in World War II were black? Not enough. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Share this story. Say their names. Benjamin O. Davis Jr., Charles McGee, Lee Archer, Roscoe Brown, Edward Toppins, and the 992 other men who wore the red tail. They didn't just fight for freedom, they proved what freedom looks like. The next time someone tells you that excellence has a color, remember this. The Nazis didn't care about politics or propaganda when they saw those red tails coming. They cared about survival. Because the Tuskegee Airmen weren't just good, they were the best. And no lie, no law, no system of oppression could change that. They flew in the face of hate, and they never looked back. Courage has no color, excellence has no race, and heroes don't wait for permission. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen.